The soap opera continues around Toronto FC, the team who was eliminated by CF Montreal at the quarterfinal stage. And as we know, Federico Bernardeschi came out after that Austin match and talked about the team not having structure. They don't know how they're playing. It was definitely a shot at head coach Bob Bradley, who, well, is in charge of the structure and tactics and making the team feel like it has an identity. And Bob Bradley responded to Federico Bernardeschi and making his comments and said, Fede was wrong for speaking that way after the game. It was a tough loss, a late goal after we had defended in a really good way. So he was wrong to speak that way after the game, 100%. And now we've discussed it inside the team. So I made it clear that was out of line. Wheels, is there a better way for a player and coach to be handling their differences? What do you make of them kind of, I guess, tossing punches here in public?
Well, I think the response from Bob Bradley was predictable, and I'm not sure why anyone would have a problem with anything that he said there. If you disagree with your manager, public displays of dissent or going against the manager, it's frowned upon, not only in football, but in all sports across the board. You keep your issues inside of the room and try to deal with them. What Bernardeschi's outburst, it may have come from frustration, but perhaps he has been trying behind the scenes to no avail. And this is the tactic. We're still not quite sure what went wrong with Insigne, why he didn't play last weekend. Do these players want Bob Bradley here? And this is the danger here. Like, Bob Bradley has to hold his ground. He has to still portray himself as, the leader of this group, the biggest voice in the room. Like, he is the authority. The buck stops with him. But if players are actively pushing for change or want him out, then this could get uglier, right? Like, I'm not sure what that conversation looks like behind the scenes. I'm not sure if they've had, blowouts in recent weeks, or what those conversations sounds like, but certainly this does not lead one to believe that this is anywhere near resolved unless people fall in line under the manager, who is still the manager right now. So it's all predictable that response, but that doesn't mean that the situation has been rectified.
Yeah. I was a little surprised by Bob Bradley's response, to be honest.
Really?
With you. Yeah.
Do you know the man? What is he?
Here's what I would kind of say is that I think there can be a difference at times as a head coach between what you say publicly and what you do behind the scenes. And I think that's how, I've seen coaches handle situations like this in Toronto in the past. It is a club where you have these high-priced DPs. They have egos at times. They have big personalities. And things like this do flare up. This isn't new for Toronto FC. Even in their most successful years with Josie Altidore and Sebastian Giovinco and players like that, I think that at times there were issues. Maybe not quite to the same extent as this, obviously, in terms of the unhappiness directly at the coach. But there are things that flare up and you have to handle. And I was a bit surprised that Bob Bradley came out and kind of publicly scolded the player. I think there's maybe a way you could handle it where you can do that behind the scenes. You can draw a line behind the scenes, sit the player down, say, we can't have this, we can't have this as a team. This kind of messaging going out of divisiveness, of people pointing the finger, draw that line in the locker room, and then come out and maybe take a bit of a softer stance in public that is designed to ease tensions rather than continue to build them. And I think...
This isn't a sign of dissent on the field, like a player blowing off a manager. This is quite clearly a player coming out publicly calling for change. That is as clear against the manager as can be. And I think if you go back in the time machine to how the club dealt with the Altidore situation with Chris Armas at the time, I think there was mistakes that were made. One, they punished him, and there was this back and forth, this speculation about what happened. But then they opened up the door and allowed him to return after, without the situation being properly resolved. Well, this is relative. This isn't the relative. Like, this didn't happen a decade ago. This happened a couple seasons ago, and TFC are still feeling the effects of that mismanaged Altidore situation in terms of their books and where they are today.
So they
got to be really careful here. Well,
So who steps in when you have a player and you have a coach who are clearly heated, and they both care about the team? They both care that they're not getting results. They both want to rectify things, but they obviously seem to be going head to head a little bit here. Whose job is it at this point then to step in and have cooler heads prevail? Because I sound like a broken record, right? But where is the leadership? Like, who also now steps in? And maybe it's as simple as, Andy, if the players aren't happy with the coach, that's the real problem. The coach has to go. Okay, but still, who's stepping in to make that decision? And, who's also stepping in if the coach is not going to go? Who's stepping in to say, sit down. We're not leaving this room until we figure it out.
Well,
the
answer,
right now.
But the answer is you need to back the manager as long as he's in the job. But the problem is now, one, the team isn't performing. So what is the standing of the manager within the club at present time? And when clearly two very high paid players who you've kind of tied your success to, looks like they're kind of against that manager in charge. It puts forward a very, very difficult dynamic. You can't just go and transfer, get rid of these players like they do in European football. Like, there's players not playing right now in the Premier League because they're in spats with their clubs or their manager, and they're just like, okay, you can sit there and not play. TFC isn't afforded that luxury. It's a difficult situation. But I'm old school when it comes to this. I don't care what you're invested in the players with the club. You have to back the manager. If you don't back the manager, then he's lost all authority, and you might as well replace him.
Yeah. Well,
I just think,
true,
I think yesterday for me, Andy made the situation worse. Like, I don't think Bob Bradley was scheduled to speak yesterday. He doesn't normally until the day before the game. That decision was made. And then you end up with a situation where you have the head coach publicly calling out a star player. And I just don't know that the player is going to respond well to that. Like, you already have. I don't know how this happened either, because it doesn't seem to have been an actual interview or media availability. But Federico Bernardeschi spoke briefly to John Molinaro of TFC Republic and basically doubled down. I'll read the quote. He said, "We're frustrated, yes, but there has to be change much more than just tactics." Like, the situation isn't cooling off as a result of what they did yesterday.
And that's why I ask, who else steps in? To completely simplify it, you have two siblings going at it. Who's the parent separating them? Because this is getting out of hand now. To your point, you got to make a decision. You're either backing your manager and you're telling the players, figure it out, or you're making a change.
Well, and Andy, even going a step further, now, right? I think we've reached a point where it's fine to admit that perhaps naming a manager who is the father of the captain could be an issue. Like, oftentimes players can intervene with one another, but it's a difficult situation. And I'm not saying the intentions are poor. And Michael Bradley's a club legend, a great leader. Bob Bradley's a proven, tried, tested, and true coach across Major League Soccer and international football. But if you want your captain or your leadership group to intervene and say to another player, like, look, you might not be happy, we're not happy, but you have to respect authority here. Like, there's a pecking order. This doesn't happen in sports where players just can call out a manager. But when the captain of the team, when the lines are blurred,
and you need that, right? Like, it can't
really
just be the coach who has all authority and everyone listens to him and respects it. Like, you've got to have the senior players who back the coach and buy into that and spread that message to the rest of the team. And Michael Bradley must be in an impossible position right now to be that guy as captain, also being the son of the coach.
This is why it was a story when Bob Bradley first came on board, because to your point, it's not like nobody knew how the relationship was going to play out. It was just either way. You're looking at, father, son. This is interesting because to your point, Michael may very well, it could be another coach with the exact same tactics, and he could very well support that coach, but it doesn't matter. The players will always just see him as supporting his dad, right? Like, it is a very impossible situation. We all knew this, which is why it was a story, which is why it made headlines when it was first announced. And this is the type of risk that you run into. This has been reported by other media outlets weeks ago. This isn't something new that we're just bringing up. And in fact, as I just said, when it was first announced that Bob Bradley was going to be the manager, right away, we all said, oh, that's going to be weird. A coach coaching his son, and how is the rest of the room going to react to that? It's not easy. It is not easy whatsoever. Let's play a game of either or, and Toronto FC is going to kick things off with this one, gentlemen, because it's also not good from a scoring perspective from the two Italians, which, you know, there is a lot expected of because they do make money. Fair or not fair, that's how things work in the world of sport. So right now, Bernardeschi leads the team with 3 goals. Insigne has 1, but he's played half as many games. As we know, he's been dealing with injury. So which TFC star will finish with more goals this season, Ollie? Either Lorenzo or Federico?
I'll say Bernardeschi because I think he's more that kind of player who's direct and, you know, goes for goal in that kind of way. I will say with Lorenzo Insigne, like he's taken a lot of heat now, and I understand some of it. I'm not saying that he has acted in a perfect way this season, that his performances have been fantastic, that his attitude on the pitch has always been spot on. But I do feel some sympathy for him right now because, and again, I know that not a lot of people at times are going to sign up for that for a guy who's earning what he's earning. But just in a footballing sense, like watching this guy in Serie A for a long time, he's a very particular type of player, and you need to do certain things, I think, to get the best out of him. And it's as good as he is and as brilliant he is as a player at his best, there are certain things he can't do. Like he's not someone who you can just give the ball to on the touchline with two defenders in front of him, and he's going to skip past both of them because he's so quick or he's so powerful. And he has that kind of one-on-one brilliance. Like he is a player who plays in combination with others, right? He understands space. He understands his, you know, the ability to connect with other players. And I just don't see those relationships there. I don't see the strategy around him to get the best out of him right now. And I think a player like that can look pretty poor pretty quickly when he is absolutely not. And we've seen years of evidence that he's not when he's put in that kind of position. So I think there is a, as much as you can have fair criticisms of Insigne, like I said, the team also needs to help him out more than they have done so far. But right now, you know, Bernardeschi, to answer the question, looks like the one more capable of impacting games.
Well, Insigne will score more goals if he can stay healthy. That's the key here. He's not going anywhere with that contract. At least I can't see him going anywhere. And he's a track record of being a more proven goal scorer than Bernardeschi. Neither of them have been prolific over the course of their careers. But since when is Bernardeschi this goal scorer? He didn't come to this club as a guy that scores a lot of goals for Juventus. He never has. I don't think he ever will. I think it was an anomaly the way that he started his MLS career. He hasn't scored in 9. Now he's picking fights publicly with the coach. Mm-hmm. This doesn't end well. Insigne is the better player here. He has a better track record of scoring goals, and I'll back Insigne to score more.